Alright, today we're going to be tying up a kind of a Circus Peanut articulated fly. The back hook I like is a Daiichi size 6 4x long streamer hook, and I'm going to use the size 4 Gamakatsu B10S stinger hook in the front, so not a huge articulated fly. I like the ones that are manageable size to toss on a 6 or 7 weight. So get this back hook in the vise. I'm using Vivus 140 denier thread. So I'm going to start with the thread on the hook, and then we're going to tie in a marabou tail as the first step. So get that started. Wrap all the way back to the bend, and then we're going to do a two-tone tail. This fly is going to be kind of an olive and white, so I'm going to start with the white marabou tail on the bottom and then olive over the top of that. Got a pretty flowy couple bits of marabou here. Take the one that's kind of got not so webby, but a little bit more stringy, I guess you'd call it. I want the tail to be probably a hook shank in length about. Just get it secured. Wrap forward. That's good. I'm gonna cut that marabou right there. Smooth out some of this fluff. Not too worried about it at this point. We're gonna wrap over it a few more times before all is said and done. Take a olive marabou. And try and find a similarly stringy one. Match the length. Trying to keep the underbody somewhat smooth and consistent. I don't want just a big chunk at the back where I tied it in, so we're gonna wrap that pretty far forward and then wrap back to keep it relatively uniform. So there's our tail. Two-tone job there. Next material we're going to tie on is some UV polar chenille. This is tan. I think it'll mix well with the olive. It's got some purple kind of accent colors in there. So I'm going to cut off probably a 6-inch piece for now. Tie it in back at the tail. Wrap this forward to probably a little bit farther up than halfway. And then palmer this forward. tie it off right there where my thread was hanging. And then the final, I'm going to pull this back and kind of push it, get it pushing back a little bit. The final material on this back hook is going to be a piece of white schlappen and a piece of olive schlappen that I'm going to tie in together. We're going to, basically the front hook tie is going to be about the same as the back hook tie. The only thing to kind of watch out for is when you're looking at your pieces of schlappen, you want the bigger, long piece with the longer fibers to be on the front hook. So I'm going to find the pieces of schlappen I have here with the smaller, shorter fibers and tie those in on the back hook, because it looks weird when the back part of the fly is kind of like larger and more filled out than the front one. So just kind of think about tying in the smaller pieces of materials you have on the back hook on these articulated flies. So I'm tying these in by the tips, then wrapping forward, tying both the white and the olive in the exact same spot. And then once I have them tied in, wrap towards the eye, and then take both of the schlappen feathers together as best you can, and then we're just going to palmer both of them at the same time forward. And we're going to brush this all out too and pick out some of the feather pieces with a bodkin before we're done. So don't worry if you're trapping a few, but try, the fewer you trap now, the less you have to pick out later. So building up a nice collar here. Get up to the eye. Do one more. Tie off right behind the eye. Two good wraps there before I snip. Pull all that back and build up a little bit of a head. We're just gonna secure all that down. Go ahead and whip finish there and cut your thread, and then we'll brush all this out a little bit. Then I like, for a less severe brushing, I just have a chopstick that I put a couple pieces of Velcro on. Stick on Velcro. It doesn't rip stuff out, but it does a good job of getting everything aligned. So there we got a nice body. That schlappen covers over that Palmer chenille, which is a little bit of the underbody, and then we've got a nice fluffy tail there. So I'm gonna go ahead and put just a dab of head cement, UV cure, super glue, whatever you got on here, just to lock everything in, and then we'll go to work on the front part of the fly. So for the front hook, B10S in size 4. I also like a longer hook in the back than in the front. So that back hook was a 4X long, and these B10Ss aren't super long. I think the longer back hook, once it's articulated, I don't know, something about all that mass back there, it just tends to whip around more compared to the front one. Looks better in the water to me. So we're gonna cover the shank of the hook, and then we're gonna tie in our eyes. I'm using some medium size double pupil lead eyes, and this does ride hook point down, so we want our lead eyes to hang on the underside of the hook. I just put a few wraps in with it on top first. It's a little easier, and then I kind of swivel them underneath and then start making the figure 8 wraps on the eyes, just like a Clouser or any other lead eye fly. Try and get them as tight as you can. They usually end up moving after a few fish, so I don't get too hung up on having them locked in. Obviously, do the best you can, but don't expect they're ever going to stay. Then I'm going to cover the hook shank with thread, going back a little bit into the bend. We want to get to about the barb of the hook, and then some spiral wraps over the top. For articulation, I'm just using 40-pound mono and no bead. It seems stiff enough once you get it tied in that it doesn't really foul all that much. So and then I'm going to do some super glue to keep it all locked in. Just a dab there. Spread that out over those thread wraps. Then the first tie-in is trying to keep it on top of the hook shank. And I'm using not too much pressure on the thread right now. I don't want, if you just try and really get too tight at first, that mono will kind of slide around all over. So the first wraps are really more to just have it held in place at the top. And then I leave my thread not all the way to the back, but kind of towards the back, a little bit towards the middle. I'm going to go ahead and put another dab of glue more on this bottom part for the moment. And then we take our back part of the fly, thread it through the mono, then work it forward. And in terms of how far back, about, I don't know what you would call this, about a dumbbell eye length or two back works for me. Like I said, this isn't trying to be a huge fly, so don't need a huge separation. And you want the front fly to flow into the back fly, so the closer they are, the kind of better they flow into each other. And then I'm wrapping again all the way back to the barb, another kind of way to prevent fouling there. And again, not super tight thread pressure at this point, just want to make sure that the mono is kind of on the top and the bottom of the shank so that the back hook rides upright, not canted to one side or the other. Trimmed off the extra mono, and now once I've got the mono sitting aligned on the top and the bottom like I like, I'm going to just start gradually applying more thread pressure to just hold it. I mean, with that super glue, I don't think it's going anywhere. But now is when you can kind of have more pressure on your wraps once you've got everything positioned how you want. It's not going to slide around on you. And then go all the way to about the point of the hook. We're going to start our feathers on the back. So for to bridge the gap where that articulation is, I'm going to use just some of the wispier marabous, and kind of how Kelly Gallup talks, you're just making a little cover for that articulation segment. So trimmed off just some of this. It doesn't have to be super neat, and just kind of jamming it on top but pushing it down towards the bottom, if that makes any sense. Then wrapping over it, and then we're going to do an olive over the top of this. So get that tied in pretty tight. Just trimming off the extra there. And then once you've got it tied in, again, you can try to push it down so that it's going to be on the bottom. It's really hard to try and tie it in on the bottom with everything going on with the hook point and the other half of the fly hanging around, but once you have it kind of on there, you can push it down so it's not right on top of this shank, but at least middle or bottom, like I have it there. And then we'll tie a similar fluffy piece of the olive marabou onto the top of that to match our tail and just cover up that articulation, really. There we go. So now we've got, it looks more like one fly than two totally separate flies. So again, we're going to use the polar chenille on the back half. Tie that in right at the back here. And then wrap to about the halfway point of this front shank is much shorter than that back one. Polymer this forward, trying to not trap too many of the polar chenille fibers down. And about to my thread, so I'll go ahead and tie it off here. Two good turns, tight, a couple more, tight, clip off the extra. And kind of tie everything, pushing back a little bit. Then we're going to tie in our schlop in again, same as the back, an olive and a white. And again, this is where if you can find a piece with a little bit longer fibers than the one you used on the back, I think it's going to look a little better for you. And so I'm going to tie this in, maybe not so much at the tip, but look to where my fibers are getting to the length that I want to start at, and then tie the feather in there. Same with the white. And wrap all the way to behind the eyes. try and get all these going the same way as much as possible. And palmer them forward. This two-color schloppen just really gives it so much more depth and complexity than a single color. It's pretty easy to do. It makes any fly look pretty dang good. So back to behind the eye. Go ahead and tie these off. Cinch down good. Snip the stems. And then tie down a little bit. I go a little bit back, push that back. We're going to tie in some rubber legs and then a cactus chenille head. Pretty simple. Brush this out just like the back. My little brush. You can see I think I did a decent job of getting the front schloppen longer than the back. Alright, do a couple of these. These are that sand color. It's kind of a brown and white rubber leg. Just do a couple on each side. So take the legs and tie them in at the midpoint. You can wrap them around your thread to get the exact measurement, but tie them in at the midpoint at the top. Have them hanging on one side and then bring over to the other side and then tie them down right there. Looking good. And then you can compare the two sides if you need to trim. I think mine are good enough there. And last but not least, some crystal flash chenille, kind of just a cactus chenille. Just builds up a pretty easy little bulk of a head that'll push a little water and add a little flash. There's no super neat way I found to exactly wrap these, but I strip a little of the flash off to expose just the core string there and tie that in. And I go under the eyes a couple times, then bring my thread all the way to the front. Just get a few wraps in behind the eyes. Then you can go under and then pack in some wraps in the front there. Again, I'm not looking for the most perfect shape or anything as neat as you would get with deer hair, but just helps to finish off the fly. Push a little bit of water at the front, so got a couple wraps to tie that off. Pull it down tight, snip this, and then we're gonna, it's kind of tricky, but try and force all these errant fluff pieces back as we tie off before we whip finish to just clean up the eye. You can always trim them too. Clean up around the eye a little bit here. That way when I go to whip finish, I'm not blocking anything. Alright, again, not the prettiest part of the fly, but I think the fish won't mind. Whip finish. And we're good to go. I'm going to put a little head cement on that. Trim this up a little bit. You can clean up this chenille. I don't want to cut too much off, but again, that's more of just a finishing step. I'm not trying to do anything too crazy with that head, but there we have it. Big, buggy, articulated looking streamer. I'm going to go try it out for some spotted bass. Thanks for watching.